Greetings, this is Jim Lindsay. This is a CIS lesson. In this lesson, we'll be talking about content from Chapter 6 in your Visio textbook, and that is the step-by-step Microsoft Visio 2013 book, and this is a really important chapter. This is perhaps the most important chapter that we cover. The material here is so very helpful as you go forward with this product, as you start to use this with your with jobs, that the material covered here is paramount. If you don't get this, then utilizing the more advanced features of Visio is sort of impossible. And so really bear down on this chapter, because this is a very important one. To get into it, what I'd like for you to do is just open your book and turn to page 240 if you would. What this chapter is about primarily shape data, and I've introduced you to shape data briefly in a previous lesson. In this one we get into details, and what we're talking about is you have a drawing and there are shapes on the page of your drawing, and what you can tell the software is, hey, this shape is supposed to represent a computer, and the serial number of this computer is 123, and the location is this particular building, and it cost us this much money, and it has this much RAM, and you can start to basically plug in data about what this picture is supposed to represent in the real world. And then with that data, what you can do, you can then run reports. You can send your employees out into the real world and say, hey, go find these particular machines and make sure that they're still in the right places and being run by the same people and being cared for. So there's a tremendous amount of utility that can happen with this data, and so that's what we want to learn about. On page 240, it starts talking to you about characteristics of data. If you've had CIS 243, and if you have learned about Microsoft Access already, this information I'm about to share with you should make perfect sense. As you create databases, as you start to enter data into a database, the data that you enter is going to have a particular type. If it's numbers that you're putting in there, that's one type. If it's text, that is another type. If it's a date or a currency or a Boolean value, those are all different examples of different types of data. On page 240, they explain what these different types of data are. Why is that important to you in Visio? Well, it's important because as you start to create your own fields for shape data in your drawings, you need to know what kind of data, what type of data is it that's going to you're going to keep track of. And so you have to specify that as you create your own fields, because what you're doing is you're creating your own fields in tables of a database that is part of this drawing. And so what you're doing is you're interacting with Microsoft Access through the Visio interface. Let's take a look at these different data types. We have string data, which is pretty much it's text. It's pretty much something that's you're not going to run a calculation on. So you could have numbers in there, but it's not anything that you're going to do any kind of math with. So it could be like your WKU 800 number could be treated as string data, because you're not going to do arithmetic on somebody's WKU 800 number. Another data type is numbers, and numbers, of course, are exactly what they sound like. Anything like that you would want to do any sort of sorting or math with, that's a number. You have fixed lists and variable lists, and what those are drop-down menus. When you think about when you go to a website and you're going to make a selection from 3 or 4 or 5 different choices, and you click on a little down arrow, and then the choices are presented and you select the one you want. That's what fixed list and variable lists are. The difference between those is that a fixed list is set, and the user cannot add to the list in any way. A variable list is one in which, on top of the 3 or 4 things that already show up, they could add their own option to that. You also have durations. So let's say in your Visio shape you're trying to keep track of how many days, let's say you want to know how many days or how many minutes or how many hours something has occurred or has gone on. That's a data type. A duration is one of those. And you can keep track of that in weeks, days, hours, minutes, down to seconds. Also, dates are a data type, and currency is a data type. So, dollars, pounds, yen, lira. Think of different types of currency. That is a data type. And then lastly is Boolean, and Boolean is whether something is true or false. So that's used pretty frequently when you're programming. If a condition is true, then you want the computer to do one thing, and if the condition is false, then you want the computer to do something else. It's a way to build in logic to a program. And so that's presented to you on page 240. Let's try and get a clear understanding of what those different data types would be. And as you guys build your own data in your own fields for your drawings, it will make sense why you chose that particular data type. And as we go forward and work with examples, anything that's sort of ambiguous right now ought to start to clear up. All right, let's start with those examples then. Let's look at the sample files you have. HR, Human Resource Process Map A, B, C, D, E, F. These are all available for download from the helpful hyperlinks page that I made available to you through Blackboard. Also, there is an Excel spreadsheet. We're going to link our drawing to data that's stored in an Excel spreadsheet. This can serve as a database for us and as a data source. In addition to Excel, you could also use any sort of Microsoft Access database. You could have an Exchange database. You could have other ODBC databases. And so this is, for classroom purposes especially, this is kind of nice. So we have these different drawings that we'll start to refer to as we do these examples, and we'll link to that one about halfway through. So let's start with HR Process Map A. I'm going to open that up, take a look at it, and I want you to see how to view shape data. Like, what shape data is there? Well, close that guy first. This drawing should look pretty familiar. We've worked with this flow chart on a number of occasions, and again, I told you back when we first started this summer class that they would present you with the same examples, and so you got this continuity, sort of a familiarity and comfort with some of these examples. So you've seen this a couple of different times. We've not worked with the shape data for this drawing though, and so how do you make that visible? Well, I'm going to make the shape data pane visible and the shapes. I've already made the shapes pane invisible. Let me show you how I did that. Up here on the view part of the view tab of the ribbon, you have this drop down box that you can click for task panes, and you may have that visible. If you have the shapes pane visible, just get it out of your way because you don't need it. So you click on which panes to show or not show, make sure the shapes goes away for you, and then click on this where it says shape data. Click on that one, and you'll see something appear somewhere on your screen. It may be smaller than mine, it could be bigger than mine, it may be floating in a different part of the screen, it could be over here somewhere, but you're going to see some pane that's called shape data. And what you want to do, I'm going to drag that. I like to keep mine over here on the right, and I like it to sort of float right there, about that big. And so I'm going to put this guy over here, and then get my drawing where I can see these shapes, and I can make that wider or skinnier as necessary. So this is the box in which our shape data is going to be visible. All right, so I'm going to click on log hiring request, and you'll see that for each one of these different shapes, there is different shape data that can be viewed or entered or edited. And because it's already been created for us, they have made this same shape data available for each one of these different shapes. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes, and if you'll recall back the very first time I showed you shape data, I showed you like a computer server and a printer and then a fax machine. And there were a lot more fields available for the computer server than there were for the printer. And there were more fields available for the computer server and printer than for the fax machine, because it's just, a fax machine is a pretty simple piece of equipment compared to those other two, and so the number of fields available was less for the fax machine. Well, in this case, because they're keeping track of processes at a company, there's the same number of fields, same number of shape data things to keep track of for each. And so what are these? Well, they're keeping track of the cost for a process, the number of the process, who the owner is. I'm not sure what they want in function. I would usually think that would be like a business unit. The starting date, the ending date of the action, and then what is actually going on with what's the status of this particular process. And so that's what's being, they would like with this shape data they would like to keep track of for these different things. And so how would you get stuff in here? Well, let's say we've done sort of an analysis, and we know that when somebody logs a hiring request, just based on how much time it takes somebody to do it and how long it takes our people in our different offices to interact with that, it has a cost. It has a monetary value. That's what I would want to keep track of in this cost field. Cost obviously is going to be a monetary amount, right? So if I try to put something like text in there, it's going to say, hey, you can't put that in here because this is supposed to be a currency. And this is where those data types that we spent so much time at the beginning of this lesson talking about, that's where that comes into play. I'm going to hit OK, and instead of putting text in here, I have to put a number, which is going to be a currency, so I'll put 5 and enter, and it converts my 5 into $5. I could put $25 in there, but I can't put letters in there because cost, when the field for cost was created, the creator basically said, okay, this is a currency, this is some denomination of money that's being someone's keeping track of. The process number, that is, we're going to enter 101 here. At our company, we would have some sort of numbering scheme in place. So like actually, instead of being like 101, it'd probably be like, let's see, it's June 15th, so we'd probably do like 0615 001. So that would be like it's June 15th, and this is the first one of these that I've done today, and so that might be like a better process number. But this, when I enter, let's see, it might have a. All right, I just pulled up the details on that. That was created as a number, and so it's not going to let me put dashes in there with it. Since the last part I had was -10, it did it as -10. So I'll go with the 101, which is in the book. But in real life, we might probably make that a string and then have it with some other form of, some other format. But that gives you an example of a number data type in use with as a field type for a field. Let's go down to our next one. Our next is the owner, and this is a string. This type of data is string data, so it's something that you're not going to do math with. So you'll be able to type in words at this point. So we'll put John Doe as the owner of this. And anytime you're going to have text like that, you want to use the string data type. The start date and the end date, these are going to be dates. So when you click on these, you'll see an interesting little button over here to the side. It has a little ... and an ellipse button. And when you click on that, because it's a date, it gives you this neat little interface where you get to select the date in which to enter. So I'll go with February 10th. You have like the little arrows to choose what it's beginning. So I'll go with February 10th, and the same thing for the end date, of course. We'll pretend here that we're not done with it yet, so there is no end date yet. So its status at this point is going to be, and this is an example of one of those fixed lists I talked to you about, is that it's in progress. And so you'll see that this is an example of the down arrow I was talking to you about. These are your choices. You can wait, wait for input, it's deferred, completed, and right now it's in progress. Okay, and there's one other thing I wanted to show you on this, and this is a variable list. I mentioned there are fixed list and variable list. This is an example of a variable list. How do I know that? Well, let me click up in here. I'm going to write Jim Lindsay and enter, and it allowed me to put that in there. Now, if I look at the different choices, you'll see Jim Lindsay is one of the choices. In a fixed list data type, I would not have been allowed to do that. In a variable list data type, I was allowed to type in my own addition. So that's those are examples of different data types. This example so far has showed you how to see the shape data, how to enter shape data, how to edit shape data. Let's say we made that $40. If we wanted to make that Susie Q instead of John Doe, and so that's how you can view, edit, and enter shape data. Now, how do we create our own shape data? That's the next lesson. And so let me save and close this one, and I'm going to go to the example. We have HR process map B that I'm going to open up, and this will look similar to what you saw a second ago, but you'll see as you go through here, it's back to that pristine state. And so to keep everybody at the same exact place, if you would open up HR process map B. All right, I'm going to zoom in and get it to where I can see mainly this top line here. And we're going to work with this. We're going to work with the advertise, the open job shape for the most part here. We will click around a little bit, but I'm also going to make this shape data window maybe a little bit larger, make it a little bit wider. All right, and what they want you to see, so you've interacted with this. You know what fields currently exist. You've entered and you've modified contents in these, but you don't know how to create these fields yet. Well, how do you do that? Well, this is how. I'm going to select a shape, and I've got this shape data window that is visible. If I right click this shape data window, and there are multiple ways to do this, but my favorite way to do this is just to right click the shape data window and then go to define shape data, and it brings up this define shape data interface box. Again, how did I do that? Let's pretend I didn't even have the shape data window open yet. If you have to see the shape data, so you could right click the shape and then go to its shape data. To go to its shape data, right click data, shape data, or from the view I can make sure that task pane for shape data is visible, and once that's there I can then right click, go to define shape data. So that's a couple ways to get this visible. As you look at this dialog box, you can make this a little bit taller if you wish. You can see the different choices, and these are the different fields that we've been working with in this drawing so far, right? And with the cost one, for example, you'll see that the name of it is cost. That's its label. The data type is currency, and you'll see these other data types listed that we spent so much time talking about at the beginning. And you'll see there's no value or prompt yet. We'll enter those in just a moment. The format for this is, if you see the little @ sign, that's the system setting. What that means is whatever the computer is set up. So this is an American, this is a computer in the United States set up to work with dollars. So it's using the system settings. It's basically going from the operating system. If you wanted to dictate that, like let's say you had you were an American company, but you had offices in Belgium and in London, and you wanted people to enter the costs as dollars, then you could dictate that accordingly. But as it sets right there with the system settings, it's going to do whatever the settings are for the computer. The value itself, this is a default value. So if I enter 125 in here, what that means is by default, and you'll see this in just a minute when I go back to it, it's going to put a value of $125 as the cost for advertising a job, because that's the shape I'm working with. So advertising an open job, if you think the default cost of that or the normal cost for that would be 125, it would automatically put that in. And for the prompt, when somebody hovers over the top of that box right there, this is the text which would show up. So at this point you say input the cost to advertise an open job. So I hit OK, and let me go back and just go to another shape, come back to it, and you'll note that it's only doing it for this one shape. In order to make this a uniform thing across all the shapes, I'd have to go in there and do them individually, or I would have to highlight multiple shapes and then do the definition change to the multiple shapes. Now be careful when you do that, because that can be a time saver, but can also be destructive. Make sure that the changes you're making are indeed something you want to apply to those multiple shapes. So let's test what we just did. If we hover over the top of that, over the top of cost, we should see a little tip saying, hey, this is where you enter the cost to advertise a job. Input the cost to advertise an open job. So that's how we got that going. I'm going to right click again, go to define the shape data, and we also have the ability to, if you wanted to set those up to show up in a specific order, that's what the sort key is for. And then these ask on drop and hidden fields right here, these little boxes you can check. Those are talked about in your book here on page like 254, 55. And I have not had an occasion to use those myself. And I've used Visio a long time, but I've not used either one of those choices. This name right here, you can leave that blank if you want, the name field. I think we're using Visio Pro, and so you get this choice, but you can also leave that name field empty if you want to. So that's some information about, like, you're examining these different fields. And let's take a look at what was the one that gave us some trouble, like the process number. You'll see that if we look at the process number, it says it's a number as opposed to a string. Like I was trying to work with it as a string in the very beginning. It's a number. If we come down to this status, let's check this one out, because this is that variable list we were talking about. The syntax, the rules that you use to make a list, whether it's a variable list or a fixed list, is important. The way in which you enter that data. As you come to the end of that list, you'll see that you can add additional stuff, but each choice has to be preceded by a semicolon. Right there, you'll see the semicolon and then the choice. And so if we wanted to add a new choice in here, like I'm going to put semicolon, I'll put apple, and I'll put OK. And as you come back to the drawing now, you come to the drop-down list for the status. If you go to the very bottom, you'll now see apple down there. And so that's a really commonly missed thing for people in my classes. I'll ask them to create drawings that have shape data that are usually of a fixed list, and they'll struggle with that syntax and how to make this list appear, to come up. And again, how that's done, going to that shape data, coming down to that field that is the status field. It is a variable list, and it'd work the same way if it was a fixed list. The syntax or the grammar rules here basically state that each choice has to be preceded by that semicolon. So make sure you're paying attention to that, please. So let's add our own field. Let's say we want to put some other field in here for it's not currently there. We want to create one, and we're going to do that. So we'll hit OK, and we're going to hit save just to save this one and close it. Let's go to the next variation of this. It's the HR process map C. So I'm going to close this guy up, go to HR process map C, and we're going to add our own field to the existing ones that are there. And you're going to, and again, get comfortable with this because I'm going to give you homework assignments, many homework assignments where you have to do this. All right, so I have HR process map C open, and I'm going to select the, zoom in here a touch. I want to work with this open advertise open jobs shape, and I'll right click and go to define shape data. And we just spent time working with all of these guys right here, but we want a new one. And this new field is going to appear right down here underneath status. And what it's going to ask is the estimated duration of this step. You know, how long do you think this advertising is going to take? And so how do you get a new field? Well, it's pretty easy. There's a button here for new. So you click on new, and it says what is the label, what's going to basically show up, you know, like is cost, process number, owner. These are all the labels for those other ones. So this one is the label for this new field is going to be estimated duration, and you can leave the name blank. The data type of this is going to be a duration, and because it's a duration, we then have to choose the format of that duration. Is it going to be the weeks, days, hours, and so on? And we're going to go with days, and we can put a prompt in here. You know, input the amount of days that the job will be advertised. And we could even put a value if we thought like, hey, we're going to advertise, you know, typically we're going to advertise for a week. So let's say we'll put, you know, 7 days. There is our value. Hit OK. And there you go. So as we look at this, let's go away from it and come back to it. We can actually, if we hover over the top, it'll say input the amount of days like we wanted, and let's say we wanted to make it 9. There you go. And then we have the little estimated duration. That's what the ED stands for after that. And so that's the way in which you would add your own fields to shape data. All right, now I think I'm going to stop there because this chapter, again, I said this chapter is, you know, so crazy important. It breaks down into thirds. Basically, we've completed the first third. You now understand what shape data is. You know how to view it. You know how to access it. You know how to enter it and edit it. And you even know how to make your own fields. And you know there's different data types. So when you're creating your own fields, you know how to select which data type to make your fields. You've seen like all those different choices you get as you input. You know, hey, this is going to be a new field. You get to, you know how to choose the data type as well as include prompts as well as set default values and stuff like that. So I think this is a good place to stop on this one. The next lesson will be about linking to data sources so that this thing can be done automatically. And then the third lesson, the last lesson, will be on running reports for your data. So I'll stop here. Thanks for your time and attention. Please watch the next two as well because those are equally important. Thanks.